Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today, we'll explore a case that occurred on Ganghwa Island, located on the western coast of South Korea. Despite being less than 30 miles from Seoul, the island's challenging terrain and transportation infrastructure have kept its development slow. Residents here still make their living through traditional occupations like fishing, rice farming, and ginseng cultivation. This land is steeped in ancient customs, but beneath its rustic and simple exterior lies a dark undercurrent, a deep-rooted superstition. And our protagonist in today's case, Mrs. Yoon Bok-hee, was precisely a victim of that very superstition. Before the tragedy struck, Bok-hee's life seemed like a perfect portrait of happiness. She had a harmonious family, a successful husband, and an exceptionally good relationship with her mother-in-law. Kim, her husband, was a ginseng farmer and businessman in the Hwaseong area of Gyeonggi Province. While not a major tycoon, he was considered one of the more prominent and respected families on this small Ganghwa island. But fate does not always follow human desires. On April 1st, 2008, Kim died in a car accident. Bok-hee's peaceful life was completely disrupted. Unable to bear the shock of losing her son in her old age, her mother-in-law fell seriously ill. Their high school-aged daughter also became deeply depressed by her father's death. Facing all these challenges, 47-year-old Bok-hee was forced to shoulder the family's responsibilities alone. For a woman as strong as her, one would expect admiration, or at least sympathy. The family's breadwinner was gone, leaving only elderly and vulnerable family members, with her son away on military service. As an outsider, even if unable to help, one should at least feel compassionate, right? However, the reality was quite different. Not only was there no sympathy, but rumors began to spread. Gossips claimed that Bok-hee was very interested in shamanic religious activities. From the local perspective, these activities were known to cause trouble. In other words, Kim's death might have been cursed by Bok-hee through these rituals. Some even whispered that after Kim's death, she received a massive 270 million won, about $270,000, insurance payout, and with inherited assets, she became a millionaire overnight with around 5 billion won, about $5 million, in assets. So what was there to sympathize with? People were more likely to be envious. However, facing these widespread rumors, Bok-hee's attitude remained stoic and silent. The villagers' daily gossip became tiresome, and gradually, discussions about her began to wane. Unexpectedly, just over 2 months after Kim's death, Bok-hee once again became the subject of island-wide speculation. So what happened? On June 7, 2008, Kim Seon-young, Bok-hee's high school-aged daughter, suddenly was absent from school. When the teacher tried to contact Bok-hee to understand the situation, her mobile phone went unanswered. In other words, both mother and daughter had seemingly vanished simultaneously. Some might wonder, why wasn't the police immediately notified? Why did rumors spread? The answer is simple. With a supposed 5 billion won in assets after her husband's death, why would Bok-hee continue living on this small island? Wouldn't leaving and enjoying life elsewhere be a better choice? Consequently, when news of the two disappearing spread, the islanders' first reaction was, "Just as we thought." They believed Bok-hee had finally removed her facade of false kindness, abandoned her elderly mother-in-law, and fled with her massive fortune and daughter. However, Bok-hee's mother-in-law didn't believe these rumors. Understanding her daughter-in-law's character, she believed Bok-hee was not that type of person. Although very worried about her daughter-in-law and granddaughter's disappearance, she consoled herself that Bok-hee might have urgently gone to Seoul for business, and her granddaughter was probably called for volunteer work. They will return in a few days. A week passed and there was still no news of the two. Now the mother-in-law was truly worried, not because she feared her daughter-in-law had fled, but because a frightening rumor had begun circulating on the island during Bok-hee's absence. People had noticed that every 2 years, women seemed to mysteriously disappear. In 2006, a 19-year-old girl had vanished without a trace after leaving a coffee shop in Gyeonggi. After hearing about the two's disappearance, Bok-hee's mother-in-law became extremely worried about her daughter-in-law and granddaughter's safety. Finally, on June 18th, she decided to report to the police. However, the Ganghwa Island police did not take the matter seriously. For these professional investigators, Bok-hee and her daughter's disappearance from June 7th to June 18th, a full 11 days, barely raised any concern. The investigators shared the same mindset as the villagers. 99% believed Bok-hee had taken her daughter and money to live comfortably elsewhere. The remaining 1% thought they might have been lured away by some cult. Regardless, they all considered this a voluntary disappearance, with almost no possibility of a criminal case. However, due to procedural requirements, an island patrol was still considered necessary. Initially, the investigators just wanted to perfunctorily handle the report. Unexpectedly, during a patrol, they accidentally discovered Bok-hee's Seon-young car on a small hill. Immediately, this made the investigation team sense something was wrong. One must understand that transportation to and from Ganghwa Island relies entirely on a sea bridge. If Bok-hee wanted to leave the island, she would certainly have to drive across the bridge. The fact that her car was still on the island meant she had not left. If she hadn't left, why had mother and daughter been missing for over 10 days? Clearly, something was amiss. Therefore, the police quickly reported this lead to their superiors. However, the police station leadership did not consider this important information. They thought Bok-hee might have intentionally left the car behind to avoid detection. With her massive assets, buying a new car would be trivial. Fortunately, besides her mother-in-law, other family members still believed Bok-hee would not leave home for money. They not only continuously urged the investigation, but also tried their best to provide leads to the police. For instance, Bok-hee's brother-in-law mentioned something very important. On the morning of June 6, 2008, the day before the disappearance, Bok-hee had come to her brother-in-law complaining that her home had been repeatedly burglarized. In just one short week, she had been robbed 3 times, with jewelry from her drawers taken each time. Perhaps knowing the local police's reputation, Bok-hee didn't intend to file a police report. She simply asked her brother-in-law if he could help her install a surveillance camera. Strangely, when her brother-in-law purchased the surveillance equipment that same afternoon and came to Bok-hee's house to install it, he discovered she was not home and no one knew where she had gone. In other words, Bok-hee might not have disappeared on June 7th, but her actual disappearance could have been around noon on June 6th. So what's the difference between disappearing on June 6th or 7th? Of course, there is a difference. Remember how this disappearance was initially discovered? On June 7th, Bok-hee's daughter, Seon-young, did not go to school. If that's the case, it means on June 6th, Seon-young was still attending school normally. But according to her brother-in-law's description, Bok-hee had disappeared by noon on June 6th. So who picked up Seon-young from school? To clarify the sequence of events, police went to Ganghwa High School, where Seon-young studied to investigate. There, they heard a surprising account from the homeroom teacher. The teacher reported that although Seon-young came to school on June 6th, she requested to leave home shortly after lunch. Who requested her to leave? No one other than Seon-young's mother, Bok-hee. That afternoon, the homeroom teacher received a call from Bok-hee. She wanted to speak with her daughter, so the teacher handed the phone to Seon-young. The surroundings were very quiet, and the phone volume was quite loud. Even though the phone was no longer in the homeroom teacher's hand, he could clearly hear the conversation between mother and daughter. "You must come home immediately from school. There's an important posthumous matter concerning your father that requires your presence," Bok-hee said. Coincidentally, an important exam was scheduled that afternoon. Seon-young intended to use this as an excuse to refuse her mother's request, but Bok-hee on the other end suddenly spoke sternly. "Aren't you going to listen to me? I've already spoken to the homeroom teacher. A Santana will come to pick you up soon. Quickly pack your things and prepare to go home." The homeroom teacher found this somewhat strange. In his impression, Bok-hee had always been a gentle and kind person who had never spoken in such a tone before. However, considering that Bok-hee had just lost her husband and was caring for her elderly mother and young child, having a poor mood seemed normal, so the homeroom teacher did not inquire further. Now, looking back, that phone call had many unusual points. First, as mentioned earlier, Bok-hee's car was a Korean-made Seon-young, so whose Santana was coming to pick up her daughter? Second, according to Bok-hee's family, all of Kim's funeral matters had been settled, with nothing requiring Seon-young's participation. From these 2 points, the police believed Bok-hee was likely being coerced. If true, the situation for mother and daughter was dangerous. Unfortunately, this time, the investigators' suspicions were correct. On July 1, 2008, the bodies of Bok-hee and Seon-young were discovered in a reed field near the embankment. According to media reports, the scene was so horrific that journalists used the phrase, "unbearable to look at." The bodies were so severely decomposed that news reports deliberately omitted graphic details, simply stating that DNA testing was required to confirm identities. In such circumstances, forensic experts found it extremely difficult to find clues about the perpetrators. After examination, they could only confirm 2 critical points. First, mother and daughter were murdered on the night of their disappearance, specifically the evening of June 6th. Second, before death, the victims were not only beaten, but also sexually assaulted. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. It's important to note that Gangwon was an island with an extremely low serious crime rate. Therefore, the brutality of the case shocked the entire island. Even residents of nearby Seoul were intensely interested in the case's developments. Major media outlets mobilized, calling for anyone with information to provide leads, hoping to uncover the truth behind the tragic deaths of mother and daughter. Faced with the serious nature of the case, the Gangwon Island police seemed concerned, but their investigation remained vague, giving the impression of treating symptoms as they appeared. When no reliable leads emerged, they quickly focused on a mentally ill woman over 50. The reason? Her son was a pastor of some religious group who frequently participated in religious rituals with Bok-hee and had a good relationship with her. Thus, the police believed this woman surely knew Bok-hee was wealthy and might have developed malicious intentions, approaching Bok-hee solely to find an opportunity to commit a crime. On the entire Gangwon Island, everyone who knew Bok-hee knew that her financial situation was good. According to the police's logic, it was not only Mrs. Kim who was a suspect. Thinking back, it was probably because some religious sects in Korea had a bad reputation. The problem was that investigators could investigate however they wanted, but they had to at least conduct some initial verification. For example, check if the suspect had an alibi at the time of the murder, and if there were any suspicious behaviors afterward. But the Gangwon police didn't care about these things. They directly stopped the person at the door and interrogated them for a while. Not to mention whether the person was the real culprit or not, but seeing that they had no clues in hand, even if they were the real culprit, they couldn't admit their guilt. For example, Mrs. Kim firmly stated that she knew nothing about the case and that she was close to Bok-hee not because of money. Just 2 sentences left the police speechless. It was only then that the investigators suddenly remembered that they should check Bok-hee's bank account to see if there had been any transactions before and after the incident. After checking, they discovered that Bok-hee's assets were not as rumored as 5 billion won. In fact, in her bank account, there was at most 500 million won, most of which was money from her husband's ginseng business. However, it was worth noting that on the night Bok-hee went missing, 100 million won, about $100,000, was withdrawn from the card. This was almost certainly related to the perpetrator. Therefore, the police immediately went to the bank branch where the money was withdrawn to ask the transaction staff if they remembered anything. The bank employee's response was unexpected. He remembered Bok-hee coming to withdraw money, with 2 young men around 20 to 30 years old standing behind her. However, having passed over a month, the employee could not recall the 2 men's appearances. The bank's security camera only captured Bok-hee withdrawing money. Finally, after multiple suggestions to help the employee recall, he reluctantly said one of the 2 men seemed to be wearing a dark blue sportswear top and black shorts. Clearly, these details would not be very helpful in solving the case, but with no other options, the police decided to use hypnosis. Indeed, after a series of hypnosis procedures, a suspect sketch was published. Along with the sketch was a description, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, wearing shorts, a fair-skinned young man. Although the original sketch can no longer be found online, when it was first published, it was collectively criticized by the media as being of extremely poor quality. Interestingly, the police even responded to the criticisms, claiming their sketch reproduction technique was world-class, and the bank employee's inability to clearly see the suspect's mouth led to the abstract drawing. Faced with sharp criticism, the police had no choice but to hypnotize Bok-hee's mother-in-law and other related individuals to create a more acceptable sketch. The problem was that besides the bank employee, no one else had seen the perpetrator, making the hypnosis of other individuals theoretically useless. However, South Korea is truly a miraculous place. 6 days after the new sketch was published, the police station received an anonymous tip. The informant, a resident from Bok-hee's village, said the person in the sketch strongly resembled a local named Jae-hwan, 26 years old. Moreover, the informant provided an important piece of information. Jae-hwan owned an old Santana car. The car, which was always parked at the village entrance, had disappeared after the crime. Through investigation, the police discovered that Jae-hwan's house was not far from Bok-hee's, and he was even a close friend of Bok-hee's eldest son, who was doing military service. With their typical rough investigation style, when they learned that Jae-hwan was hanging out in Seoul with 3 friends, the Gangwon police didn't hesitate to immediately arrest all 4 of them. After verification, aside from Jae-hwan, 26, the other 3 were Ha-young-myung, 27, Lee Min-young, 24, and Yoon Ki-il, 26. Experienced readers would likely notice that mentioning full names rarely bodes well. Initially, the other 3 friends were arrested merely for investigation, as the bank employee had mentioned 2 young men standing behind Bok-hee, indicating the perpetrator wasn't acting alone. Since they were good friends of Jae-hwan, why not bring them in for questioning? Unexpectedly, all 4 young men quickly admitted to murdering Bok-hee and her daughter. According to Jae-hwan's confession, because villagers claimed Bok-hee had 5 billion won in her bank account, he conceived the idea of kidnapping her to make some money. To make the action smoother, Jae-hwan called 3 friends as accomplices. Among them, Young-myung and Min-young, like Jae-hwan, were unemployed, with only Ki-il having a legitimate job. Bizarrely, the entire criminal plan was proposed by Ki-il, the person least dependent on crime to survive. According to the plan, from late May to early June, the group had repeatedly broken into Bok-hee's house for petty theft, with the aim of becoming braver. On June 6, 2008, Jae-hwan's group kidnapped Bok-hee on her way home after dropping her daughter at school. They then split into 2 groups. Young-myung and Min-young went with Bok-hee to the bank to withdraw money, while Jae-hwan drove the Santana to pick up Seon-young from school. In the previous description, some might find it strange that Bok-hee didn't cry out for help at the bank. The reason was that her daughter Seon-young was in the criminals' hands. Naturally, this was part of their plan. Initially, Jae-hwan's group promised Bok-hee they would release her after getting the money. But how could anyone trust these criminals? The tragic final outcome for mother and daughter is already known, and there's no need to recount it here. But listening to this, haven't you noticed a significant contradiction in the story? According to the collective confession of the suspects, Young-myung and Min-young accompanied Bok-hee to the bank to withdraw money. This also matches the bank employee's account of 2 young people standing behind Bok-hee. If so, the suspect's sketch could only be of either Young-myung or Min-young, right? So why, when the sketch was published, was Jae-hwan the one recognized? In fact, after verification, the person the bank employee saw was likely Min-young. The absurd thing is that Lee Min-young wasn't wearing shorts at all. In other words, the suspect's sketch was completely unrelated. Regarding this, the informant had probably long suspected Jae-hwan, but lacked evidence. So they took the opportunity of the sketch's publication to present their perspective to the police, coincidentally guessing correctly. Of course, people prefer to believe in a predetermined fate, that heaven opened its eyes and allowed the police to catch the real perpetrator. What was even more unexpected was the surprising discovery during the case's interrogation. At the beginning of our program, we mentioned that Bok-hee was not the only woman to disappear locally. 2 years earlier, in 2006, a 19-year-old girl named Ha Soo-hee had vanished from the village. Unfortunately, when checking the criminal records of the 4 suspects, the police accidentally discovered that Ha Soo-hee was Ha Young-myung's half-sister. This truth immediately gave the investigators a bad feeling. Sure enough, through interrogation, Ha Young-myung admitted that he and Jae-hwan had killed Ha Soo-hee together. The motive was similar to the Bok-hee case. They wanted to extort money from Ha Soo-hee's father, who was also Ha Young-myung's father. However, due to various reasons, they were unsuccessful, and these ruthless individuals ultimately killed Ha Soo-hee to eliminate evidence. Afterward, the police found Soo-hee's body near the Sihwa Lake shore in Gyeonggi Province, following the suspect's testimony. At this point, the 2 women's disappearances in the village had been solved. However, the matter was not yet over. Since all 4 suspects had initially admitted their crimes, the trial was expected to proceed smoothly. However, as soon as the trial began, the 4 defendants suddenly made a collective attempt to backtrack. First, Yoon declared that he had only participated in the preparatory stage of the crime, offering advice to his friends, but not actually carrying out the act. The other 3 claimed they only wanted to make money and had never intended to kill anyone from the start. They argued that the murder was a momentary impulse and hoped the judge would mitigate their sentence. However, the prosecution team quickly presented 2 irrefutable pieces of evidence. First, before the crime, Jae-hwan had used Directory Assistance 114 to obtain the school phone number where Seon-young studied. Although he didn't call afterward, this was sufficient to prove that the plan to kidnap Bok-hee's daughter to threaten her was carefully premeditated, not a spontaneous decision as the suspects claimed. Secondly, in April 2008, more than a month before the crime, the suspects had purchased knives, gloves, tape, and tools for disposing of bodies. Clearly, they had never intended to let the victims survive. Only Yoon was truly just a planner who did not participate in executing the crime. Therefore, the local district court in the initial trial sentenced Ha Young-myung to death, as he was the one who directly killed the victims. Jae-hwan and Lee Min-young were sentenced to life imprisonment as accomplices. Yoon with the lightest offense, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After sentencing, all 4 appealed. On July 9, 2009, the Seoul High Court approved the modification of Ha Young-myung's death sentence to life imprisonment. The sentences for the other 3 remained unchanged. With this, the Ganghwa Island case closed, but the pain of Bok-hee's family will forever remain an unhealing scar on this small piece of land. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.